So Labor Day marked, if not the end of the lunar summer, Labor Day was the end of summer for those of us who come from probably anywhere north of, I don't know, you pick it from me. I used to think when I lived in New York State that the Ohio River ran all the way to California, but that's not the case. The end of summer, of course, isn't the reason for Labor Day. Labor Day was created by President Grover Cleveland. And the reason it happened is fascinating. As I say, it used to be an excuse for double headers in baseball. They don't play those anymore. And for picnics, which are still great. But, well, as I say, I lived north of the Ohio River and east of the Mississippi, including the time I lived in Ogden Dunes, Indiana, which is when I first worked in the steel mill. And one of the best ways to get from Ogden Dunes to the Loop in Chicago was on the South Shore Railroad. And on the first trip I took, one of the stops enabled me to see the historic buildings of a neighborhood called Pullman. Pullman, named after George Pullman, who is the place where they made the wonderful rail cars, the Pullman cars. But it was the site of a dramatic strike by the workers at the Pullman factory. Some of you will know better than I. Led to some riots, and that was what first really led to recognizing the right of working men and women to join unions, which definitely changed. And until the last decade or two, where unions consist mainly of government-related workers, the original union movement tended to consist of two different forms of organization. One kind of related to the medieval guilds, okay? The plumbers, electricians, pipe fitters, what we would call trades and crafts. Think AFL, the American Federation of Labor, which was organized along the lines of what people did. The other type of union was the industrial union, which was organized not along the lines of the work people did, but of the nature of their employer's business. Industrial unions, think automobile industry, think steel industry. For the life of me, I can't remember whether the United Mine Workers was CIO or not. But my background was in dealing with industrial unions. And the thing that's fascinating is in an industrial union, let's take an auto plant. You have the trade and craft workers who are really well paid, who create the tools and dies that are necessary, whether it's for stamping out steel into parts for the automobile, whether it's for maintaining the equipment on the production line. You have the production worker who's making the product, and you have the janitor who is sweeping the floors of the factory. And they're all called together, and the employer's well-being is based on each of these people in these very diverse forms of labor being able to do his or her work together. There's a Christian counterpart. There's a Christian counterpart. Paul writes several times, and I didn't pull up the passage in 1 Corinthians about the human body can't be all ears. The human body can't be all eyes. And he uses this to talk about the different gifts that are necessary for the functioning of the church. Now, somebody's going to throw this back in my face this week. I know it. Okay. But the person who runs the bulletins, plays the piano, prepares fellowship, cleans the floors, makes sure that all of the physical plant is together, is every bit as important to the functioning of the church as is the pastor. That has nothing to do with whether educations and the like differ. The point is that all have to work together as one for the church to be the church. If Carolyn's not playing the piano, I hate to think what our singing's going to sound like, okay? It's not always that good anyway, but that's another matter. Now what's interesting is, at least according to the early 20th century sociologist Max Weber, one of the things that Protestantism brought to bear through Luther and Calvin is that all human work, and I think they would throw aside lawbreaking, is consistent with God's will. And very particularly, that which is done for the bread on our tables is part of God's plan. That the Protestant Reformation embraces, Weber's work was called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. And people tend to think of the Protestant ethic as being workaholic. No, that's not it. The Protestant ethic is that whatever work we are called upon to do is indeed work that is necessary for God's plan to unfold. I was going to say that I'm privileged to having now what would be my professional work be in the service of the church. It's no different from when Ron Vuxen, who unfortunately isn't here today, when he was driving the truck in the steel mill and I was producing steel. It's no different from when Mike was, rather than being a man of leisure, was a trooper. Rogers being a corrections officer. I was going to get Roseanne in the work that she does for children here. All work, all honest work, is blessed by God because it is part of what God needs for this world to survive. I'm not throwing that out as a sop to anyone. But what I am trying to suggest is that indeed those of us who are privileged to stand up here need to have a certain level of humility, because all work is acceptable in God's sight, and I accept law-breaking from that. Okay. So, in essence, there are two things that I want to say. Working for bread is fine. It is part of what God needs. Celebrate it. But I also want to say that there is another bread that isn't the result of our labors. It's the result of grace. Grace alone. That is what over the past several weeks, as we read from the Gospel according to John, we called the bread of life, or the bread of heaven. But the bread of heaven is not that stuff that we read about the Israelites. I guess we didn't use the word manna in the word, but it wasn't that manna that was found on the plants in the morning. That's not the true bread of heaven. The true bread of heaven is, of course, Jesus Christ. And while as a good Protestant, I believe that this is a symbol of Jesus Christ. The fact is that Jesus Christ is the bread of heaven that we are given. And work is good. But the bread of Jesus Christ exceeds, the free gift of the bread of Jesus Christ exceeds any bread that we might earn through our earthly labors. For on the night before he died, Jesus dined with his disciples, and he took the bread and he blessed it and he broke it and he gave it to them and said, "Take, eat, this is my body."